मॉर्निंग क्लास। हेलो प्रतीक। प्रतीक है क्या? ठीक है, ठीक। Today's topic is parathyroid hormone. Today is the last class for the endocrinology section, and we'll wrap it up with the parathyroid gland. Uh, it's a topic very relevant to you in surgery, mostly, as well as medicine. Everything is related in medicine, or rather related to medicine. So without losing any further time, we'll start with our presentation. So parathyroid gland, basically it's release of parathyroid hormone, which helps to control the levels of basically calcium and phosphorus, and it helps in the balance of calcium and phosphorus. As you know, there are 4 parathyroid glands, each round about the size of a grain of a rice, and it's usually located on the thyroid gland just behind your neck, and it helps to control the level of calcium, phosphorus, and vitamin D. Normal level of serum calcium is 9 to 10.5 milligram per deciliter, and that of a phosphorus is 2.5 to 4.5 milligram per deciliter. We are not talking about the ionized calcium as far as the serum calcium is concerned, and which is more diagnostic is basically the ionized calcium. And this is the overview where you can see the parathyroid gland on the back of the thyroid glands. But parathyroid gland can be found at the extrathyroid organs also. And basically, this is a very beautiful diagram. That's I want to highlight this diagram. You have this parathyroid gland, and then the capillaries going into the thyroid gland, and innervating the parathyroid glands too, and where the low calcium in the blood, it basically works as a regulator for the calcium homeostasis, and basically the function of PTH is to increase the calcium level in the blood. So as far as the functions are concerned, it activates and increases the number of osteoclasts, which mobilizes the calcium from the bone, and which is basically responsible for the cell turnover and the osteoclastic activity in the bones. And there will be increased renal tubular resorption of calcium, and there is increased conversion of vitamin D to 125 active dihydroxy, that is 125 vitamin D, which is formed in the kidneys, and which are responsible for the absorption of vitamin D from the GIT tract. And there will be increased urinary phosphate excretion, which further reduces calcium loss, and then obviously the increased GI calcium absorption. So as far as bone is concerned, PTH stimulates the osteocytic pump, and as osteoblasts in class, they do not have PTH receptors, but there is something called signaling system. So indirectly PTH stimulates formation of new osteoclasts, and it also basically activates both cell lines, the osteoclast and the osteoblast, but clastic activity predominates predominates over the blastic activity, and that's why there is a resorption of calcium from the bone. And this is how it is being regulated through the extracellular fluid, the calcium and the plasma level, and it tends to stimulate any decrease in calcium level will stimulate the parathyroid gland, and it will help release calcium from the bone. It regulates 125 vitamin D conversion at the kidney level, and that will lead to a more absorption of calcium from the GIT tract. And Further, just a footnote about calcitonin. It is basically secreted by the parafollicular cells in the thyroid gland, and it works in antagonist to parathyroid gland in calcium balance in the cells and in the plasma, and it decreases basically the osteoclastic activity and stimulates high calcium levels, and even stimulating distal tubular mediated calciuresis, and it work in tandem with the PTH in order to maintain a calcium balance in the blood. So hyperparathyroidism can be classified under primary hyperparathyroidism, as in we have seen all the endocrinology disorders. Then you can have a secondary hyperparathyroidism, and you can have a tertiary parahyperthyroidism. So primary is basically the unregulated overproduction of PTH, can be autonomous generated PTH through the adenomas or pancreatic cancers, and secondary hyperparathyroidism can be due to any other associated conditions or chronic conditions which leading to decrease in serum calcium level. Then there is something called tertiary hyperparathyroidism, which is basically characterized by the development of autonomous hypersecretion of PTH, and thus causing hypercalcemia. So basically primary hyperthyroidism epidemiology, you'll see its incidence is as much as 27 cases per 1 lakh, and its prevalence is basically 0.1 to 0.3%, and prevalence in women, especially in more than 60 years of age, is up to more than 1%. So it's more common in women, and I can see the etiology as I talked about the primary parahyperthyroidism. You have adenoma of the parathyroid glands, then it is associated with multiple adenomas, or as a part of a multiple endocrine neoplasias, where you will have hyperplasia of the parathyroid gland, which is associated with the other associated abnormalities, and then you can have parathyroid carcinoma. Kidney diseases is a secondary cause, the most prominent cause, and then you have a tertiary, and tertiary the etiology is actually unknown, and there appears to be a certain alteration in the set point of the calcium sensing mechanism to a hypercalcemic level. So this is how you parathyroid is secreted through this is a basic diagrammatic representation where you can see the PTH secreted by the adenomas and hyperplasias, and even renal cell carcinomas, certain tumors which can increase parathyroid hormone secretion. And then the secondary causes can be renal failure or any vitamin D deficiency because of any absorption problem or something like that. So then I've talked about a part of it can be a part of a men, that is a multiple endocrine neoplasia, where you can have a type 1 and type 2 men. Men type 1, you basically have a parathyroid adenoma, pituitary adenoma, and pancreatic islet cell tumor, that is 3 Ps, while men type 2 will be parathyroid adenoma, thyroid medullary carcinoma, and pheochromocytoma, which forms the acronym PTP. So as you know, this increases the calcium level by reabsorption from the renal tubules and GIT and bone resorption, and decrease serum phosphate level by increased serum excretion of the phosphates. Clinical features, both sex can be affected, more common in women, and especially in the middle age, or maybe above 40 and 50. And the landmark features are basically related to the bones, the stones, abdominal groins, and psychic mons. So what happens in bone? You will have a severe pain and tenderness because of the osteolytic lesion in the bone, and there can be a generalized arthralgia. Overall, arthralgia can lead to, over a period of time, a deformity of the limbs and the spine, and it predisposed to pathological fractures and delayed union. And then as a stone, it can call nephrolithiasis as well as nephrocalcinosis, and that is a renal colic, a renal pain because of the formation of the stone in the kidney parenchyma as well as the kidney excretory system, or at the tubular level, as the phosphate is secreted through the tubules, and the calcium present in the tubules might lead to formation of the calcium oxalate, calcium phosphate. But the most common calculi is basically calcium oxalate. Then you can have polyuria and dyspepsia and nocturia and hypercalcemia. The polyuria and dyspepsia can be because of basically it also induces it also simulates nephrogenic diabetes insipidus. So because of the innate ratio of ADH, there can be enhanced urination or a polyuria, and that can lead to more intake of water, and that is dyspepsia and dyspsia, and then you can have eventually you can have a renal failure. Then abdominal groans can be in the form of anorexia and nausea and vomiting. Constipation is very common. Dyspepsia and peptic ulceration is a very common with PTH, hypersecretion of the PTH. And psychic moaning could be in the form of depression or psychotic features. Even drowsiness and impaired cognitive function will be there. So as far as radiologically the bony involvement is concerned, you can be in a form of skeletal or a soft tissue, and on the skeletal level you can have osseous bone resorption, diffuse osteoporosis, even regional osteosclerosis, bone softening can be there, and there might be a periostitis and brown tumor, which is a very typical term used in cases of hyperparathyroidism. At the articular level, you can have erosive arthritis and chondrocalcinosis. There is the calcium deposition around the joints. Then you can have a visceral calcification, especially in the vessels, and soft tissue calcification, vascular calcification, all kind of things. And as far as the radiological features are concerned, these terms are basically for memory stimulation, basically subperiosteal resorption, and most common location is the phalangeal tufts, which will be the end of the phalanges. Even the radial aspect of the middle phalanges of the middle three fingers is very common, very typical of this hyperparathyroidism. Then you can have distal end of the clavicle, or medial tibial metaphysis, or medial femoral neck. And this is how the subperiosteal resorption looks like. This is the phalangeal tufts, you can see. This is the resorption of the bones on the terminal side of the phalanges. The loss of lamina dura, which tends to encapsulate the dental cavity, and there can be weakening of the teeth from its roots. Then you can have a subchondral bone erosion and sclerosis, and that can lead to narrowing of the joint space, especially the distal interphalangeal joints, most commonly the ring and the little finger, then MCP joints, then iliac side of the SI joint. And this is how it looks like. This is the resorption at this level. Then intracortical bone resorption, that is at the cortical level, because of the osteolytic action and the increase in the osteoclast stimulation, there can be lysis of the bones on the cortical side, and that leads to cortical tunneling, something called. Then it can be endosteal bone resorption, and it forms a lytic lesion, and you can see the translucency on the radiograph. And this is called osteal scalloping. Then there can be a trabecular bone resorption with this spotted ossification. A very typical name is the salt pepper skull because of the varying osteolytic lesion in the bones, in the bone of the skull. Then subligamental bone resorption can also be there, and diffuse osteopenia is very common, which is osteopenia and osteoporosis are two terms which are being used or indicative of low bone mineralization. And then it can be a regional osteosclerosis, which is more common in the secondary hyperparathyroidism, and especially it's seen on the vertebral column, where you will have it will simulate something called a Rugger-Jersey spine. There will be sclerosis on the intervertebral sides, and there will be bone softening, especially leading to bowing of the long bones and biconcave vertebral bodies. There can be something like what happens in rickets. You have it can be genus valgum or genus varus deformity, or there can be a kyphoscoliotic deformity of the spine. So all things, and the very important term is the brown tumor, which is osteitis fibrosa cystica, because of the replacement of the bone by vascularized fibrous tissues. As there is the osteolytic lesion, the space created by the osteolytic lesion inside a bone that tends to be insufficiently and inadequately replaced by the fibrous tissues, and that basically is due to obviously high osteoclastic activity, and that expansile lytic lesions with a well-defined non-sclerotic margin within the bone, and that is basically called brown tumor. The location is very eccentric, and they can see this is a bone, supraosteal bone resorption. Well, the brown tumor diagram, I have misplaced it, I guess. So yeah, here you have this brown tumor. You can see. Then renal calcification, we talked about the calcification, and can be in the form of nephrocalcinosis and nephrolithiasis. Nephrocalcination is the parenchymal calcification, while the nephrolithiasis is the pelvic calyceal system, or the excretory unit of the kidneys, forms a staghorn calculus. So basically, a patient of a hyperparathyroidism, and this is a very common kind of a caricature where you can see there is a diagram of an old man with a kyphotic spine, and you can have stones as well as bronze and psychic mons. So the basic algorithm for the diagnosis of hyperparathyroidism is first the clinical features, the general weakness and the arthritic pains, the bone pain, deformation of the skeletal, and the pathological fractures, and we talk about the X-ray findings. Then there will be a laboratory associated findings in the form of hypercalcemia, hypercalcinuria, and increased level of alkaline phosphatase. And the clinical forms of hyperparathyroidism will be in the form of bony or a visceropathic or a mixed form, and you can have parathyroidoma can be then visualized through sonography or CT scan or MRI. And on a sonographic feature you can see a parathyroid adenoma looking like this, and MRI scan very well elicits very explicitly make out the adenomas. And this is the CT scan of the upper mediastinum. Then this is a dual X-ray absorptiometry system, which is a DEXA, where you have a T-score for the bone mineral density, and when it is usually the BMD is if less than 2.5 is classified as osteoporosis, or well below 2.5 is basically severe osteoporosis, or anywhere between 1 and 2.5 is osteopenia. You have a normal serum calcium level. That is, we're talking about the ionized serum calcium level is 2 to 2.5, or rather 1 to 1.4 millimole, which is the normal ionized calcium level. And any hypercalcemia is either the total serum calcium is more than 2.5 millimole, or the ionized serum calcium is more than 1.4 millimole, and a severe hypercalcemia will be defined as the total serum calcium is more than 3.5 millimole per liter. Usually most of the laboratory or the lab diagnosis is basically through the serum calcium, which is more convenient and more easily available. Then hypercalcemia crisis, which is basically when a severe neurological symptoms or a cardiac dysarrhythmias can be present in a patient with serum calcium is higher than 3.5. Complication of hypercalcemia, as PTH goes on to cause hypercalcemia, the complication will be sinus bradycardia. There will be increased short QT interval, and very high level of serum calcium can lead to cardiac arrest, which is a very dreaded complication. And there can be hypertension because of the vascular calcification and the stiffness of the vascular walls. There can be hypertensive urgency or very high blood pressure, when can lead to stroke and all. Then you can have pancreatitis, peptic ulcer disease, maybe calcification in the pancreas, and that can even lead to pancreatitis. Nephrolithiasis is a very known complications, and accelerated vascular calcification can lead to or the vascular or cardiovascular risks. So hypercalcemia syndrome, basically I put it under hypercalcemia syndrome, which is a kind of an emergency where you have a polydipsia, polyuria, and anorexia, vomiting, muscle weakness. You can have a metastatic calcification or a shortened QT interval. So medical therapy of the hypercalcemia, it has to be addressed on an urgent basis, and the mainstay of therapies for hypercalcemia is adequate hydration with saline infusion and a forced diuresis. So that what basically it is a method of increasing the urinary excretion of calcium, and along with the sodium absorption, and prevents the reabsorption of the calcium by the renal tubules. So basically these are the tested therapies for severe hypercalcemia. With saline will be in cases of emergency. When you have an acute hypercalcemia, it's hydration with saline with forced diuresis. And for a chronic hypercalcemia, or even you can try biphosphonates, especially cases of hyperparathyroidism or a chronic hypercalcemia. Just a minute. हेलो प्रतीक भैया, वो एक बार टेलजी वालों से बात करो ना, अप टू डेट का सब्सक्रिप्शन मिलता। हाँ एक्सपायर कर, मेरे को व्हाट्सअप करो ना, मेरा नंबर नहीं है इसको। So biphosphonates basically they're the first generation and the second generation and the third generation. You have etitronate, pamidronate, zoledronate, alditronate. You have certain oral composition and certain even intravenous compositions. They tend to take some time to act, and they are basically the calcium binding. They act to the calcium binding mechanism. They have a high potency and they are used for a long period of time. Then the calcitonin, which is an antagonist of PTH, again this has a very fast action, a very rapid onset of action, and it can be used as an adjunct to hydration with saline and diuresis in cases of severe hypercalcemia. And then the phosphates, you have the oral phosphates, which is again for the chronic management of the hypophosphatemia, or intravenous can be given with a severe hypercalcemia or a cardiac or renal decomposition. But basically, once you institute the calcium binding and the other hypocalcemic therapy, that will take care of the hyperparathyroidism or chronic hypercalcemia. You don't need a oral phosphate addition. Then glucocorticoid can be used, especially in certain as an anti-tumor agent, because as I talked about, there are certain tumors, malignancy, which can lead to hyperparathyroidism. And the dialysis is the treatment of choice when there is a ensuing renal failure or acute renal failure. So then the treatment for primary hyperthyroidism, especially if it's an adenoma, the treatment of choice is surgery, and especially for patients who have significant hypercalcemia, nephrolithiasis, or a decreased bone mass, or age less than 50 years, and an infeasibility of a long-term follow-up, or and the basic method of basically the surgical removal of the parathyroid gland, and post-operation basically it's recommended that the diet should be fortified with the calcium and calcium medications, vitamin D, anabolic steroid, calcitonin, and physiotherapy, exercises and massage can be tried. So now coming on to the secondary hyperparathyroidism, it is when the PTH secretion is basically is to increase or compensate for the prolonged hypocalcemia, which can happen in the chronic renal failure, where the failing kidneys, they do not able to convert vitamin D to its active form, and excess phosphate combines with the calcium to form calcium phosphate stones, calculi in the renal tract, and both processes leading to hypocalcemia and hyperplasia of the parathyroid tissues, and leading to secondary hyperparathyroidism. This is how it basically manifests. And it also can, as I talked about, the vitamin D malabsorption due to chronic pancreatitis or small bowel disease or a bariatric surgery, and the clinical feature is almost analogous to what happens in the primary hyperparathyroidism. Investigation wise, the serum calcium levels are basically low and the PTH levels are raised. Phosphate levels depends on the etiology, and the treatment out here, the treatment of choice is medical line treatment, and underlying vitamin deficiency and chronic kidney disease have to be addressed, and the other analogs like calcium mimetics or calcium analogs can be used. Tertiary hyperparathyroidism, there is a continuous stimulation of the parathyroid, which results in the adenoma formation and unregulated PTH secretion. So we usually even after the correction of the underlying cause will not stop excess PTH secretion, and so the parathyroid gland hypertrophy and it becomes irreversible. And out here, the serum calcium and PTH levels both are raised, and phosphate levels are even very high, and the treatment of choice again is total or subtotal parathyroidectomy. So moving on to from hyperparathyroidism is hypoparathyroidism. Out here you can have a decreased secretion or activity of the parathyroid hormones, and the very synonym which has been used with this is tetani or hypocalcemia or Dye-George syndrome, osteomalacia, pseudohypoparathyroidism. Basically the causes for hypoparathyroidism can be classified under iatrogenic, neonatal, which is very common, the genetic associations, then infiltration of parathyroid glands with the certain infiltrative and connective tissue disorders, iron deficiency, congenital, and autoimmune. Iatrogenic, this all the causes which I have listed, it completely covers the causes for hypoparathyroidism. Post-surgical, it can be a very common, which is comes under the iatrogenic, where you will have post-operative hypoparathyroidism even after total thyroidectomy, or when after the removal of the parathyroid gland, or any irradiation in the neck or in the laryngeal tissues or in the thyroid, or even the extensive irradiation to the mediastinum or to the face. And So it forms there is a typical term is the hungry bone syndrome, which develops after a parathyroidectomy. Autoimmune causes are basically it develops very early in the early in life. It can be as early as 6 months to 20 years. It exists in a sporadic or a familial form. There is a typical type 1 autoimmune polyglandular syndrome, which is also called Ham syndrome, where you have a primary hyperparathyroidism, that is due to destruction of the parathyroid glands. Then I talked about the iron deficiency, or even metal overload, or because of the infiltrative reasons, hemochromatosis or the thalassemia, where you will have iron overload, or there will be because of the breakdown of the hemoglobins, there will be iron overload. The Wilson disease will be a copper overload, which may cause primary hyperparathyroidism. Then hypermagnesemia is one of the causes. Aluminium deposition, especially within the parathyroid glands, may cause primary hyperthyroidism in patients with end-stage renal diseases. Then hypomagnesemia can again be a cause for a reversible functional primary hyperparathyroidism. Then infiltrative are hemochromatosis, granulomatosis, amyloidosis, and progressive systemic sclerosis. Neonatal cause can be especially unborn baby of a mother with hypercalcemia, who have basically a chronic suppression of the parathyroid functions. And at birth, the maternal calcium excess is eliminated, and a newborn are at risk to hypocalcemia. Congenital causes very common is that very unknown one is the Dye-George syndrome, which is basically can be because of the mutation on the gene 22, chromosome 22. And then you have isolated autosomal dominant and autosomal recessive conditions, and diabetic embryopathy, and hypoparathyroidism with short statures, mental retardation, and seizures. These all form a feature of Dye-George syndrome. So basically the categories encompasses there is a deficient PTH secretion, inability to make an active PTH, or inability of the kidneys and bones to respond to PTH. So what happens because of the decrease in secretion of PTH? Obviously there will be decrease in the calcium level, and that will lead to something called tetany, which is very common in the form of a muscle spasm, or it can be a hand is fixed in the form of an obstetric hand, or a spasm of the facial muscle can cause something called a sardonic form of a mouth or fish mouth, or a spasm of the chewing muscle can lead to trismus, can lead to convulsions, dry skin. And the clinical features will be very common paresthesia. Can be a sublingual or a perioral paresthesia, which is an abnormal sensation such as numbness, tingling, or burning, especially around the mouth and the fingers. There can be hoarseness due to laryngospasm, and that can even lead to dyspnea. And it's basically form an emergency where there will be can be associated bronchospasm. Then hypotension because of the deficiency of calcium, and refractive heart failure with cardiomegaly is again one of the dreaded long-term complications. And poor teeth development in children is very common, and then it can be widening of the wrist in children because of the delayed infusion. And signs and symptoms are very common. You do a Chevostek sign and Trousseau sign. The Chevostek sign is an abnormal spasm of the facial muscle that's elicited by lightly tapping at the patient's facial nerve and near his lower jaw, and you can see the spasm as seen in this diagram. Then you have Trousseau signs. Trousseau signs in the form of a carpopedal spasm, where you have when the tourniquet is applied on the arms, there will be upper arm is compressed, and there will be you can see there will be a latent tetany, which is a carpopedal spasm, and this is how the fingers will attain the posture on the application of the tourniquet, and as the blood pressure cuffs are compressed. Then you have something called Schlesinger's symptoms, where the patient's lower limb is held at a knee joint and flexed strongly at the hip joint, and there will be sooner will be next tensor spasm at the knee joint with the extreme supination of the foot. Hoffman sign, which is the increased excitability of the electrical stimulation in the sensory nerves. The ulnar nerve is usually tested, and it can be a stridor. Laboratory study, you will have primary hyperparathyroidism, serum PTH levels will be low, serum calcium level will be low. There is something called pseudo hyperparathyroidism, where the serum PTH level is high. Then there is secondary hyperparathyroidism, where serum PTH is low and serum calcium is high. Hypocalcemia is characterized by as the calcium level goes down and a high level of phosphorus in the blood, and there will be measurement of 25 hydroxy vitamin D is again very important to exclude vitamin D deficiency as a cause of hypocalcemia. So the hypocalcemic features and something analogous to a rickets feature can be very common in cases of hyperparathyroidism. Serum magnesium may be low. Serum phosphorus, as PTH is a phosphatidic hormone, so it may be high. And on ECG, as we seen in hyperparathyroidism, will be a short QT interval. Over here, it will be a long QT interval, and there might be a predisposed to arrhythmias. And for the usually such patients, every 3 months a blood test is recommended, and where serum calcium and the symptoms are not stable and they need further more frequent tests. The treatment of hyperparathyroidism is basically you have to address the low calcium level, and that can be compensated through diet rich in calcium, like green leafy vegetables, nuts, then orange juices, and big for cereals, fortified those big for cereals, and avoiding this carbonated soft drink, because that hardly serves any these soft drinks, they hardly serve any purpose. Then oral calcium tablets are available in form of phosphate and gluconate, where in various combinations. Then a vitamin D preparation is used, and there is something called synthetic form of PTH, which is teriparatide, which is given as a subcutaneous injection on a daily basis. This is a basic presentation of the diet, which is rich in calcium, which can be used in patients with hyperparathyroidism. So this is all for hyperparathyroidism and hyperparathyroidism. So I've quickly wrapped up the this parathyroid part, and we have come to an end of the endocrinology section. And now we'll start with a new system in the next lecture. And if you have any queries, you can let me know. And I wanted to finish this parathyroid hormone quickly, because this is a topic which you will be covered in your surgical classes. So that will be a kind of a fortification experience for you. So we'll wrap up our endocrinology system, and we'll take up some other system in the next class. I will let you know very soon, and we'll plan a small test on this in the coming weeks. Anything you want to inquire about? I hope you got the gist of the lecture. You can revise this topic every time I take a lecture. You should please go and revise it through your text, and I think most of your queries will be addressed there. And if there is any point you want to discuss about, you can always let me know. Thank you, class. Thank you very much.
पंच कर रहे हो?
हाँ, जा रहा हूँ।
पंच करते हैं रोज।
हाँ, 2 दिन नहीं किया तो मैंने